All right, Hot Breathiverse. Welcome back to Hot Breath Live. This is the show where you get to ask your favorite comedians your favorite questions about comedy. And today we have one of my favorite comedians, a guy that shares the same spirit in creating your own success in this game, only focusing on what you can control and helping other people do the same. So that is the whole goal of this interview, is to hopefully you leave here with a new perspective on how you can stop waiting for someone else's approval and just start getting ish done. So without further ado, welcome to Hot Breath Live, Mike Cannon, everyone. Welcome, Mike Cannon, everyone.
Thanks for having me, dude. I appreciate it. And that you've been doing this show a while, right?
Yeah, I've been doing this show like 4 years now.
Because it's a perfectly appropriate title for a quarantine podcast. But, I have not brushed my teeth in a timely manner once since this whole thing started.
Yeah, it just gets more and more timely. So I stumbled upon something exciting here, I think. And we've interviewed a lot of the people in your special, like Robert Kelly and like Rich Voss have been on the show as well. So like we've run in some similar circles, but it's good to finally get you on here. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. Same, man.
So everyone in the comments, go ahead and start posting your questions. I am going to selfishly ask some of my own questions first, because as I was producing my own comedy special and looking at what other people were doing and how other people were doing things, Mike's popped up actually on my birthday. January 24th is when this
happy birthday,
was actually released. And I'm always inspired, and I always like resonate with comics who are like on that independent hustle, just looking for ways they can make it happen themselves. Mm-hmm. So in jumping into your personal experience with your comedy special, let's kind of go from like beginning to end in terms of even like, first off, like my special's called The Trophy Husband. I clearly had like a theme around it and had a vision for it.
Sure.
I guess first introduce yourself to the Hot Breathiverse and then get into like your special and how the idea even came to be.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Mike Cannon. I'm a New York City-based stand-up comedian. I've been doing it a little over 11 years at this point. Cool. I released an album through 800 Pound Gorilla Records when was that? September of 2017. So that was my first kind of foray into, showcasing that I am a stand-up comedian, because I've been on radio, I've been on some TV, I do podcasts and all that stuff. And then when people would ask me where can they see my stand-up, there'd be, a limited opportunity aside from, poorly shot YouTube videos and stuff like that. So the impetus for the first album was to just get something down, have my first hour that I was touring with as a headliner, and I was proud of it, put that out. And then for the second one, I just, obviously as a comedian, you want to grow each and every time. You want to do something a little bit different. You want to offer something more. So, no networks were knocking down my door. I have a good relationship with all these people, but at this point they're like, listen, you're a good comic, and that doesn't say much these days. We can't sell you based on quality comedy apparently anymore. So you gotta start, getting your name out there and become in need. A lot of the people that are getting specials now are already famous. They have an audience to draw from. It helps secure the financial the confidence of your financial backers. So I decided to sit out and do a special. And the idea for Life Begins in terms of, Andrew Schultz, I assume, right?
Yeah, for sure. He's been on the show as well. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I love Andrew. I love what he did with the 441, his first special, which was kind of a mini piece. And it was, 4 clubs in one night and doing spots all around the city. It had a few interstitials of him in the cab and talking comedy with a couple other comedians and stuff like that. And I like the idea of presenting something on kind of, a smaller scale, so to speak, and a little bit different from the typical uncut hour-long special. And I'm lucky and fortunate enough to work at the Comedy Cellar, and the story how I got in there is obviously pretty insane, and it involves several of my heroes. So that was immediately where my mind went to start.
Oh, to almost like tell the story of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, the Cellar, and it was a little bit tongue in cheek, right? Because the Cellar is like a very huge character in comedy at this point.
Yeah.
Louis has shot his show around there. Pete Holmes did Crashing around there. Countless people have shot it in a various form of medium. I think True TV did a full, documentary even on it. So it's been the topic of conversation for a really long time. So tongue in cheek, I decided to share my story, as if anybody could possibly give a shit. But what makes it interesting? Are we allowed to curse?
Yeah, no, it was just funny. I'm just, yeah.
So the story about how I got in was I happened to be hanging out there with my buddy Chris DiStefano and his daughter. I was having dinner with them, and Chris was supposed to do an opening set for Colin Quinn as he was working out his new show, Red State, Blue State. And unfortunately, Colin had a heart attack. He's okay now. This isn't breaking news. He had a heart attack, and I was asked to cover, and I had a great set. And from that, I ended up getting my audition.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
because also in your special, there's like Jim Norton, there's Rich Foster, there's Bobby Kelly. Were they there? Oh, and Keith Robinson as well. Don't want to forget
and Keith
him.
Robinson.
Yeah.
So they weren't there, but Bobby Voss, Keith to a lesser extent, just because I haven't necessarily been wildly social with him until recently.
Cool.
But especially Jim, especially Bobby, really have helped me out early on in my career by giving me opportunity on the radio and on podcasts. So, and not to mention, I'm a huge, ridiculous geek for Tough Crowd on Comedy Central.
So good.
Opie and Anthony. I mean, I read, Norton before I met him was my favorite comedian. And that's not to say he's since ruined it with his personality. But no, I'm just saying he was my favorite comedian. I was obsessed with all of these guys. I read the book, so I've been laser focused on the Cellar and the table and all that kind of surrounds it for a really long time.
Yeah.
So to get a mini Tough Crowd reunion on my own special is kind of a wild pipe dream come true.
And how did you actually start to get the actual tangible pieces together? So did it first start off with the idea, I want to do something that's more kind of like an opening skit that has interstitials throughout, and then did it evolve into okay, well, what cameras do we need? Who's going to direct this? That process.
So the idea was me, I was just kind of I'm in, a million group texts. My phone is an absolute nightmare. It's constantly buzzing. People are, it's comedians throwing bits. It's other comedians telling me they want to kill themselves. And then my friends from home not understanding what's happening in my life. So it's just a constant, onslaught of messages. But I was going back and forth with my buddies, Brendan Sagalow and Mike Feeney, two very, very funny comedians. And I was just kind of giving my pipe dream scenario of what would be cool to get, right? All five of these guys, imagine if they were in my special, how ridiculous would that be? And they were the ones that were yeah, I kind of think you could do that. And I was no, they would never do it. And they're you do radio with these guys all the time. You have a relationship. You're friendly with them. Just ask. And so I ended up pitching the idea to Schultz, actually, because I know Giannis did his special with Andrew, and I was oh, that would be cool. I feel like I need to level up a bit here, so maybe having somebody, having Andrew's name will help get some eyes on it and stuff like that. And I pitched him the idea, and he liked it. Also said he thought we should go in a different direction, which might be a future project. But this, I had it so stuck in my craw that I was all right, well, I'm going to actually just take from Andrew's book, and instead of waiting for him, I'll just do it myself. Boom. And then we'll do another thing maybe later, So right after that, I knew this guy, Mike Lavin. He's Homeless Pimp on Instagram.
Yeah, I follow him.
He's so talented, man.
Yeah.
His eye his photographs are unreal. Just check out his photographs. You could just see that this guy sees the world in a very unique and beautiful way. And I know he had done some other docu stuff for comedy. He's shot some sizzles for live shows. And so I knew he could make a film and edit some stuff together. And then I pitched him the idea, and turns out he was a huge O&A fan. He's a huge Tough Crowd fan. He's got the exact type of Asperger's that I do. He's just locked into the everything that I said. He was boom, boom, boom. He saw it from the moment, didn't want to change a thing, and just was in. And basically, this, we were talking before, and you were asking me if I was comfortable talking numbers with spent and all that stuff. And this is where I get extremely fortunate, and I don't think I'm a typical case where I pitched this to Mike, who has his own equipment, who does this, who knows how to edit,
Right.
who knows, who does this all for a living and has some really cushy gigs that float him to where this wasn't going to be his, cash cow. So he took this on as a passion project and immediately was like, hey, man, whatever you need, we'll do it. We'll figure out the money later.
Wow.
So
okay.
The money I gave him was actually just because he put in so much work, I gave him a pretty decent percentage from the door when we shot.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Is there music? Do you have music playing, or is that in another room?
I do. Should I turn that down? Yeah. Let me.
Is it I Want to Love Somebody? Is that what's playing?
It's the only music you could play on a Tuesday at 11 a.m. 1 sec. Alexa off.
So everyone, comment with your questions. We're gonna get to them soon. Julio, I see yours. But we're gonna jump into those.
About that.
No worries at all. I was just like, wait, is that I Want to Love Somebody going on right now?
I was wondering in the background because my shoulder started moving to it. And I was like, oh, I'm dancing. If I feel it, then it's definitely making its way through the headphones.
Yeah, but it is funny how I learned that from filming my own special with just setting the intention first. Then the pieces almost just start to gravitate towards you. But I feel like as comedians, we can get in this, comedians aren't great at like a growth mindset of like, well, this is possible or what else is possible. Right. And I think people like you and like Andrew Schultz have opened up our minds to thinking bigger. But it is like mine kind of came to be. I was like, well, I'm 10 years into comedy. I'm just going to record an album. And then a fan of the podcast heard me talking about the album and was like, hey, I have a production company. We can just film it as a special. So it's kind of like these pieces fall into place, but you first have to almost like set the intent for them or have to open that door for it to open to you in a sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think, I'm no filmmaker, so I understand. Like, I have a decent eye for things, and I help the editing, with Mike during the whole process. Yeah. But I handed the keys to him because he has that ability. But I do think that like it's that Coppola thing, right, where you start shooting before you even have the money to make the movie. I think Louis told a story about hearing that Coppola started shooting what's the Apocalypse Now. He started shooting that movie before he even had the financing for it.
Incredible.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, listen, it doesn't work out all the time, and obviously there's a lot of sad stories that go with that more than positive. But if you're gonna do something, you might as well dive in. And as a comedian, as a self-hating person, I don't like asking for help. That's where I'm at my most uncomfortable. So the idea for me to even ask my heroes if they would sit for 10 minutes and do what they do best, which is verbally trash me, that was a nightmare situation. That was the hardest part of the entire thing.
And when it actually came to, I mean, it looks great, first off, and clearly, Mike has a clear eye for lighting and all of that. So he would be, I guess, someone else to talk about like the specs with, as opposed to like the actual. So maybe we'll talk to him about those. But in terms of like your side of it and preparing the material, because I know what you said 11 years in, but you recorded an album just a few years ago.
Yeah.
So I mean, what was that process like? Yeah.
I turned over the material pretty quick. Actually, I was pretty happy with myself because it took me 9 years to write the first hour, right. and not just to write an hour of material, because anybody can write an hour of material, but the hour is the shaping of it, right? Is the editing, is the thematic through line, is trying to figure out a show, because you could, I'm one of those people where I'm a bit long-winded. I'm also, I'm very imagery based, so I like to paint a picture with my words a little bit. So I'm not like, I can't just slap 60 minutes of jokes together and have it be entertaining. If I'm talking up there, it has to have some sort of, if not theme, a through line or flow to it that almost like it plays as a complete piece as opposed to just a fractured thing slapped together.
Yeah, and did you find a lot of it started out as like individual pieces you then kind of had to start to weave together in a sense?
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of the individual pieces didn't even fit. So some of the stuff that I had 60 minutes of material for this second one for Life Begins before it was even called Life Begins, before my wife told me she was pregnant. So I was ready to go. I was ready to shoot something that was of similar tone to my first album. I think it just kicked in. So it was, more or less of the man-child shit of, doing drugs, drinking too much and having this long-term girlfriend or wife at that point, despite being a piece of shit. But then my wife, I went overseas. I went to the Middle East to perform for the troops, which that's my closer. Now it's like that turned into a 7.5-minute piece. And obviously my wife being pregnant and then having our son was such a major life event that I threw out about 30 minutes of material.
Oh, you threw out like 30 minutes after this new chapter of your life came to be.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it was just like, I'm not ready for a kid. I'll never have a kid.
Yeah.
Just classic premature ass.
Yeah, that's where my material is right now. Yeah, I'm married but don't want kids and all that. That type of deal.
Yeah. I mean, and I wanted it. It's more, I think my material was more or less coming out of the insecurity of whether or not I could handle it. So I think that's a lot of my comedy, which people, it's easy to misinterpret, especially now in the era of taking everything literally, is a lot of my stuff is showing my overreaction and showing how, ridiculous I can be in certain situations. So when I'm like slamming a point home that I am 100% correct, the undertone of that is, isn't it ridiculous how correct I think I'm being?
Okay. That's great self-awareness as well. I heard you say in an interview that as soon as you stopped trying to be funny and just started trying to be authentic on stage, that's when you really started to find creative momentum.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm just, I'm very personal. I've tried to write jokes from a different perspective aside from my own. When you start comedy, you try on a lot of different outfits.
Right.
Right. You're basically like, what kind of comedian am I going to be? And am I an absurdist? Go up there with an orange and eat it and then throw it at a kid in the front row or something. It's like, nope, that's not me. Then you do a one-liner and you're like, oh, I could barely write. So then then you try a story and you're like, nope, nobody finds me interesting enough to hang on for about 11 minutes. So you have to finding your voice is more or less cobbling together your natural abilities and trying to, make it kind of congeal into one thing. And I think I did that when, you could hear parts of it on my first album. I'm still happy with it. I still think there's some really good stuff on it. But I think the real turnover in terms of me knowing how to speak about my life and about me personally came with my second hour.
What was that tipping point with your writing? And this could tie into Liam Harvey asked, actually, what made you grow faster and better as a joke writer?
It's interesting, man, because, every 6 months, I think I've figured it out. And 6 months ago, I should have quit. That's my mindset every 6 months. It's like, all right, now I got it. And I'm so glad back then nobody heard what I was saying. And then, and then in 6 months, I'll be like, all right, now I figured it out. So glad when I thought I figured it out that nobody heard what I was saying.
Exactly.
So it's all of these little things. I don't know if it was a tangible off the stage moment, but I remember when I got that joke, two things. When I figured out the title track to my first album, which is, I think it just kicked in, that's like a 6.5-minute story about mushrooms. When I figured out how to get that joke, that very specific hallucinogenic joke, to work on the road where people didn't know who I was, and it's a joke about drugs, especially something that people our age, I guess, have experienced it. But when you go on the road, you're performing for every walk of life, with blue hair to, young to who knows, nobody really, you don't have your people yet.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But I got that to work with a generic audience, and I was like, okay, I figured something out. And then the second one was when I figured out the joke about the last time I got hit by my parents. That figuring out how to make that work in front of a tourist crowd about getting beat by my parents, I was like, Okay, I figured something out.
And how did you figure that out? Like, could you take us through kind of the process of like maybe where the joke started and the type of reaction it was getting to then how you were able to mold it into like, oh, this is ready for everyone?
Well, I mean, the mushroom joke is kind of unfair because that whole story happened, and the kid gave me the punchline. So that, like, the guy literally, after 4 hours of screaming and flipping out and putting on a a wild drug hazed show, he came outside and then looked at me and goes, "I think the mushrooms just kicked in." So like that, I just, as soon as he said that, I was like, bit.
Right.
Like I was on mushrooms and I typed it into my phone to like remind myself later. And so that's almost unfair. But the getting hit by my parents, I was watching a prior special. I forget which one it was, but he was doing this really in depth, like almost scene. He was acting out this whole scene and talking about his parents, his mom whooping him and his grandma, beating the shit out of him and all this stuff. And it was hysterical. And then I remembered, I was like, oh, I remember getting hit, and I remember the story, and I remember my mom swinging, and I caught her hands, and I immediately thought, I was like, oh, that might be funny or something like that. And I just kind of took it out and talked about it on stage loosely. And I'm a better writer on stage than I am in my home. So
Gotcha.
I'm studious to the point where I listen to my sets and I write down the stuff, and then I organize it from there. But I'll bring a chunk or an idea onto stage, and my fear will help fill in the funny a little bit. You know what I mean? If I'm backed up against the wall and I have nothing to say, and there's a group of people looking at me, just waiting, waiting for me to say something interesting, typically my body, out of sheer, reaction, will have something. Or if it doesn't, I'll just die on stage.
What is the success rate of that? I feel like fear guiding you, like how many times will you try something out of fear that works versus doesn't work?
So the premise itself, like if I know the premise is something I want to be working on, I'll bring it out for a long, long time. But and I'll fail with it. I don't care. I'll couch it in between bits at work. I will, I'll make sure that it doesn't submarine the show. But working out in New York City, the best part is that you can do so many spots in a night, right? So I can run through about 6 different tags in one night and have an idea of what works the best for the next night. So there's a lot of crowds that probably see me, and it's the only time they'll ever be exposed to my comedy and be like, well, that was a forgettable pile of shit. And then they'll never go see me again, which is totally fine. But then hopefully by the time the finished product is out and then, you showcase it to whoever is interested, it's fully formed and ready.
So back to Liam's question about what made you grow faster and better as a joke writer. Is it being willing to sit in that fear and face it and try to create in that moment?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think that's exactly right. Is your worst fear when you start out is bombing, and then you bomb, and you're like, yeah, that's just about just as bad as I anticipated.
Right.
Like it is. It's soul crushing. It's heart wrenching. I take it really personally because my material is so personal. It's not that they just don't like my jokes. It's that they don't like me as a human being.
Right. Yeah.
Which is true. I've run into a lot of people that just don't like me on a personal level, and it just is what it is. So, after a while, you just got to be okay with yourself and be like, well, I find this good, and I've workshopped it enough with enough people that I know it's relatable to at least, a sect of humanity.
Okay. And Sabarish actually followed up here. He's actually from India. He's actually tuning in from India. Sabarish
What's up, Sabarish?
And he says, like, please share your writing process. And maybe that can also be part of, like, you try stuff out on stage more than on the page. So then are you recording your set? How are you refining and grading stuff,
So my entire process, top to bottom, is I'm either in conversation. I'm an on the fly writer. I certainly sit down to edit and to organize and stuff like that. I am studious on that level, but I'm an on the fly writer where like I say a lot of things in conversation that I think are good enough for stage immediately. So if I say something in conversation, I'll just be like, all right, hold that thought, shut up in the middle of a social gathering, and then just write down what I just said. and then take it to, I try to remember it as best as possible. I take it to stage. I forget 75% of it. And then kind of, like I said, the fear fills in the gaps. So if I say 1 or 2, 3, 4, or 0 things that work more, after that, I'll remember it. I'll write it down. I'll try to memorize that. And it just keeps stacking like that. So I write, try to remember it, don't remember it, riff stuff, write down that stuff, try to remember that, remember some of it, riff, write down that stuff. So it's all just kind of constant, like, paraphrasing of my own ideas until eventually it becomes strong.
And you said you're studious in the editing process of it. Like, what goes into the actual editing? And do you record all your sets and listen back, or are you all just trying to remember everything?
I do. I record my sets. Okay. I could be better at listening back. What I am very good at, though, is getting off stage and immediately writing down something that worked.
Ooh, that's gold.
So and a lot of my sets that, like, I mark down my sets. Let me I'll pull it up real quick.
Oh, that's great.
I'd mark down my sets. I don't know if you could see. That's probably too much. But it says, like, New York Comedy Club, riff heavy. New York Comedy Club, new tag, Taylor Swift, contract, eat it. Like, so I'll have certain notes of, like, this is at 5:35, I said this. So it's stuff that I go back to listen to to see if it works as well as I remember, to reword it, write it down. So it is all that editing stuff. That to me is the most painful, but it's the most necessary. Is you have to re-listen to yourself, even though, I mean, there's nothing that makes you want to hurt yourself more.
Yeah, and that's something I think all comedians are like, yeah, I record everything, but I listen to like 10% of it. But I could,
right.
I learned from preparing for my comedy special that, whoa, this is very valuable. But it's kind of like having your back against the wall of like, well, you have this deadline to film this thing, so it better be ready. Yeah. So it's like you have to do the work, and it's, if you want comedy to be your job, at some point you got to start treating it like a job.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, and nothing has taught me that even more than this quarantine, to be perfectly honest, because, it's easy to go out every night and do spots and write comedy and stuff like that. This quarantine has actually forced me to now become a technical savvy person. I'm doing podcasts on Zoom. I just bought all this new equipment. I have to edit my own clips, like all this stuff. So it's forced me out of my comfort zone where, I'm not saying comedy is easy at all. It's not at all. But I'm saying that I've been doing it for over 11 years to the point where I've gotten into a rhythm on how to achieve, my end goal. Mm-hmm. So this being not able to go on stage and just focus on other aspects of the career it's been an invaluable lesson, actually.
Yeah. And what was your marketing with your special? Because my biggest weakness is I'm not afraid of the work. I'm not afraid of doing things, but it's like as soon as I achieve something, then I'm just like, okay, what's next? So it's like,
sure.
I filmed the special, released it, and then was like, okay, what's next? I didn't even think about marketing or what the end goal of this was. And my personal strategy was looking at everyone giving away their special. I was like, well, let me try the opposite and let me try to sell it. So I'm actually selling it through my website with the whole goal. Like if I break even, my whole goal is just to break even and show other comics that this is possible to do. You know what I mean? So like, what was your thinking in terms of, okay, the creative side of it and the production side and all that, but then like, okay, what am I going to get out of this in a sense, if that makes sense?
So my whole marketing plan was the special itself is 45 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. It's got about 31 minutes of stand-up comedy, and then the rest is interstitial, and even the extra, the credit footage, which was me dealing with a heckler during the second recording, which was ridiculous. But my whole thought process was, okay, I will not release the full hour on the special, so I'm going to give away about 30 minutes. After that, hopefully that will act as a business card to then advertise for the full hour audio album. Once the audio album was out, then I was starting to cut up the extra minutes, that extra half hour, into clips. I'd roll that out on Instagram and on YouTube. And then I also have been, we'll start chopping up the actual special and putting those into individual clips as well. So it gives me, it's worked and it hasn't at the same time. Like, this is all trial and error. you put out the piece. My piece did pretty well. I wish it could have, gotten even higher numbers, but it is what it is. It still lives on the internet and will forever. Now, with the rolling out of the individual clips, that gives people something to digest that's smaller, right? So if they watch that, then they're like, oh, I want to see more of that. Maybe they'll go to another clip. Oh, I want to watch more than that. Oh, this guy has a full special. Let me watch his whole special. So it's all just trying to cast a wide net in hopes of bringing people back to the main project.
So you put out a bunch of like micro content, hoping to funnel them into the full special to then come see you live and to listen to your podcast. Is that kind of the
that's the entire thing, man. Is before recently, live comedy was how I made 100% of my money for the most part, right. And now I'm lucky to where I get residuals from both of my albums at this point, and I make a little bit of money off of my podcast as well. So that stuff is keeping me afloat during this time. But the idea for me, I love stand up. I'm a stand up comedian. I can act. I enjoy doing that stuff. It's super fun. But I want all of that stuff to fund my stand-up.
Yes.
So if I can tour, if I can continue to create, and if I can continue to do stuff that I want to do that is centered around me being a live performer, that's the end-all be-all, man. Everybody wants to turn you into something else, but I just love stand-up.
Yeah, and what now? Yeah, all of us comics are in quarantine. What do we do?
What an idiot.
What do we do, Mike?
I mean, honestly, this is the only thing you could do. I've seen people do the live IG live stand up stuff, and more power to you if you're going to do that. I personally listen. I did a lot of open mics for no people for a long time. I'm not trying to do that in my living room. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, Sean Patton was on here last week, and he was saying he did a Zoom show that had like 15 audience members in it. It was like they're starting to grow beyond just like comics riffing with each other. So we're trying to figure it out here.
I think that it could be cool. It's just like right now, I think it's difficult because everybody's online, so the traffic is slammed. So with even like slight delay stuff, it's fine when we're in a one-on-one conversation, but you're trying to deliver a joke, and then like you're in the middle of the first two words of your next sentence, and you finally hear the laugh from your last joke. Mm-hmm. It could throw off everything.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about your comedy special as well, and that you did just throw it on YouTube. In terms of did you even try to like Zahan actually, who's actually up in Canada? Zahan is. He said his special is free, like it's on YouTube, so totally different marketing. But did you at first try to pitch it to a Netflix or anything like that, or?
I don't think we sent it to Netflix because I thought that was just an unreasonable goal to set. I know who they're looking at this point, and my hopes was to create this special and gain interest from them for a future project, or to gain interest from another network. I believe we sent it to Comedy Central. We may have even sent it to Amazon as well. But I was pretty gung-ho on just giving it away giving part of the material away and then hopefully leading it and making my money back on the audio end, to where I was totally fine with just putting it up on YouTube. Because all I wanted was as many eyes on it as humanly possible. So, and it's funny, man. Right before all this, I sold out my first comedy club. And it was all based on the special. It was all based on the podcast I was doing to promote the special. A lot of people came out from that. So I think we're looking at, the NBA talks a lot about the player empowerment period, right? Where, guys are teaming up together and they're tampering just on an individual player thing because they realize that they have the leverage, they have the name, they're the ones that are selling the tickets.
Yep.
And now I think we're in a comedian empowerment period where comics are starting to realize it's like, all right, if I put this out for free, then I'm going to make money on the back end. It's all an investment back into yourself. Yeah. So, I started up because the Comedy Cellar is so great and so generous. They give you 100% of the door when you film the thing.
Oh my gosh.
So I did 2 sold out shows at the Village Lantern or Village Underground, which is their big space. And that's how I was able to pay for my production. That's how I was able to pay for my time. That's how, I was able to start from a place of not panic. So if I had to make up a $10,000, $15,000 nut, then I would have been much more aggressive about selling it.
How did you market it to sell out 2 shows?
That was me doing radio and podcasts.
Gotcha.
All radio and podcasts. So I did Jim Norton and Sam Roberts on Sirius a few times. I did Ari Shafir's podcast. I think really helped push it over the top because he just has a huge fan base, and he just slammed home that people should come and check this out. And this is how people are doing. I mean, he's, whatever you may think about his Kobe joke, Ari is a very good guy that really cares about his fellow comedians. So I couldn't be more appreciative to him for the help to sell those shows out.
Yeah, that's what's so bizarre about that situation is like people are like comics are like, he's the nicest guy. Like, I don't get like why. I mean, some people are like, he's done this with everyone that's died, and then other people are like, he's literally the nicest guy I've ever met. This does not show who he actually is as a person. So it's such a bizarre like contrast there.
Yeah, it's one of those things where he does do that with everybody that dies. I think he grossly underestimated Kobe Bryant's reach and who holds him dear.
Yeah.
Because, I think he just thought it would be like one of those things that just, he says it, gets a chuckle from his fans, and then it gets swept under the rug or whatever. He didn't understand that Kobe Bryant is an international beloved person.
Yeah.
And that was just a swing and a miss,
Oops. Yeah. Oops. Have you talked to him since that happened?
Yeah, he seems totally fine.
Oh, he no remorse or like, ooh, maybe not.
I mean, I'm sure. I don't know on that level. There might be some of them, but I think if your intent is to be funny, then that's kind of all you can ask for. When people are trying to call for your head for making a joke and then you respond with an apology, it kind of admits that you weren't kidding. Because the only defense for a joke is, I was kidding. I have a 6-minute chunk about circumcision, on my special that I then put out individually on YouTube, and I had to take it down individually because it just got flooded with anti-circumcision maniacs that just like, how dare you cut into your innocent child's penis and he'll never forgive you. This is exactly like a circumcised victim, you piece of shit. Like just people that are like, it's madness. And like at first I was having fun kind of like batting them around like a cat, but after a while you just get flooded by these maniacs and it's like, you guys are so dumb. Like I'm just kidding. I don't know what's going on here. There's really nothing to defend besides like, you guys are the ones trying to hurt feelings. I actually set out with the intent to make you laugh.
Yeah. And this actually ties into the next question from Julio, who asked, how does a comic develop thick skin?
If you find out, let me know. Because I feel like I have on some level and definitely have grown used to taking a beating a little bit, but it still bothers me. Everything still bothers me. There's still, I'm not at the level where I feel comfortable not looking at my comments. I'm still in dire need of support and of generating interest and an audience to the point where I respond to everybody on Twitter. Rich Voss made fun of me for that. Like when my special was coming out, I was responding to every single person saying, thank you for watching. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. And Rich is like, hey, stupid, why don't you act like you're famous already?
Dude, you have his lisp down.
Yeah, I know. I actually just completely wet my keyboard. So that was the real Voss. But I'm still at that point where like, I've gotten better at kind of shrugging off a few things, but I'm a comic. I'm a sensitive guy. That's what makes me funny, and that's also what hurts me.
But I think that's a generational thing in terms of, I feel like comics at our like generation, because I'm 10 years in, you're 11 years in. So I mean, and you're like developing in New York. I mean, you're like 20 years compared to someone who's developing in like smaller scenes in terms of just skill set. But like, I feel like comedians now, not like a Rich Voss who's on the other end of the spectrum, but like comedians coming up and building fans, it's like part of our job is to now interact with, if someone comments, it is kind of like responding, making sure they're heard and feel a part of your fan base and feel like invested in you and your journey. I think that's something it's part of the job now.
Well, I think so also because there are so many options, right? Like, so if you don't, they can easily find another comedian who will.
For sure.
So
For sure.
there's funny people that are also very accessible, and I would like to be both up until a point. I would also like to be able to shut it off a little bit.
Yeah, but it makes such a difference, I think, long term. With we're investing in our fans of the future, even doing a Q&A like this, and like having people get to ask their own questions. You know, a lot of my interviews before the quarantine, well, none of them were via Skype. It was all in person. But now I'm like, hey, we've built this community. Let's all try to figure this out together. And the Q&A is what people wanted to hear. So now we're doing it.
Well, and now it's great. You could get guests that, you know, I don't know when I would have come down to Atlanta. So I would hope to be booked there as soon as possible, but I don't have anything on the book. So it's great that we can, you know, the quarantine almost like forced it to happen. It's great.
It really did, because I was in this mindset of it has to be in person or not. It's like I've been offered phone interviews and I'm like, no, I'll wait till we get it in person type deal. But now it is like, oh, just by any means necessary, I'll just, you know, let's just make it happen. So it was all kind of making lemons with lemonade in terms of the situation we're in. But
100%.
Let's get into let's land this plane here. We have Carter. He's actually out in Arkansas. He
Nice.
jumped in on the Sean Patton Q&A last week, and he was actually planning to move to New York before all of this happened.
Before it became the hot zone.
Yeah, it's like now ground zero, which I think you got out of there, didn't you? Did you?
Yeah, we came to my hometown pretty early, just because I live in Brooklyn. The Bloods that were living on my front stoop were not practicing social distancing, so I figured it was safer to get my wife and small child out of there and give him some space and allow him to be outside as opposed to cooped up in the 2-bedroom apartment.
Smart. So he asked, Carter asked, do you think the NYC comedy scene eventually returns back to normal?
No, I mean, well, there's going to be a new normal. It's not going to be what we thought. I have a feeling that this might shutter a club or two for sure. You know, there's a lot of people, including comedians, are operating on razor thin margins, and you know, as you can see, there's a lot of GoFundMe's going around from clubs to help support their staff and things like that. Which you know, I'm all for, as long as one of the owners isn't a Bitcoin billionaire. Sorry.
Which one is that?
I'll leave it vague. Just
Bitcoin billionaire.
Yeah. He certainly owns one of the Upper West Side clubs that is now asking for, you know, money for their fucking staff.
Upper West Side. It's a he. Okay, we're narrowing it down here.
No, it's Stand Up New York. I love those guys. I would just hope that, like, they, you know, it just seems a bit silly to start a GoFundMe for their staff when one of their owners is literally a billionaire. That to me seems an odd way to go about things. Jeez. But whatever.
Yeah.
I think they'll survive it. They're a great club and they'll be back. But there's a couple other places that, you know, like I said, they're operating razor thin margins. They're trying to make their way through this as much as any performer is. So, you know, could be far less comedy clubs, could be more alternative venues. You know, bars maybe start looking more into comedy because they need to pick up on a Tuesday night or whatever. So it could be a little bit more guerrilla when we get back, as opposed to, you know, the 9 proper comedy clubs that it was beforehand.
So what can comedians do? What are you seeing comedians do in terms of in this current time? Like, what are you seeing working, or what are you seeing experimenting with, or what are you going to do even?
What I'm continuing to do is to post my stand-up clips. I'm now, you know, because everything is content heavy at this point, and there is no opportunity to make a person-to-person connection, I'm now posting clips, you know, 5 times a week, maybe 6 times a week. So I'm doing stand-up clips. I'm doing other, like, you know, I did a guy named Kramen who runs his own music festival because I dyed my hair pink when I got bored, like the second day of quarantine. You know, I'm just doing stupid characters. I did one, you know, anything that you can do to just put out content and try to hit with anything is beneficial. And now I'm doing a Patreon. I see a lot of comedians that are really not only surviving but flourishing on a Patreon, and it's something that Mike Feeney and I, he's my co-host for Irish Goodbye Podcast, we had talked about it for a long time, but we are on Gas Digital Network, so we have our own separate agreement with them where we provide extra content for their subscribers, and we see a little bit of money off of that. But now we've started a secondary project, myself, Feeney, and Brendan Sagalow, where it's going to be entirely Patreon. It's behind a paywall. It's wild as shit. It's and hopefully we can take some of our fans from our podcasts and also, accumulate some new ones and help support and make some money.
So is that how does Gas Digital work? Because you mentioned you make some money from your podcast. Is that all through sponsorships underneath Gas Digital? How does that process work with the network?
Yeah, so we get money. We get money for sponsorships. We also get money for when people sign up to Gas Digital using the code IGP. We get a little cut of that.
Okay.
So each time somebody becomes a member and they use our specific code, we get a cut of that. But then everybody that uses any code gets full access to every single show that's on the network. So you get all their extra footage, you get all their episodes, you get all their videos, all that stuff. So some people that may join because of Legion of Skanks, which is their most popular podcast and kind of their cornerstone show, they can then maybe bleed over into Irish Goodbye, but we don't directly see that money. We just see the influx in listens, and that also dictates our advertising price. But for Patreon, that's kind of a direct to fan thing, almost, farm to table,
right?
type of thing. You want to hopefully serve it up to your most loyal and diehard fans, where you're like, all right, listen, we're putting in the effort, we're doing extra episodes, we're doing videos, we're listening to you guys, we're hoping to create that community. We're talking about that. We're reaching out to your listeners and saying thank you, and being accessible is great. Now Patreon provides a legitimate community for you and your fans to exist in, and and you guys you're right there in the same space, shooting the shit, sharing ideas, all that stuff, and they are active participants in our Patreon. So
yeah, that's what I love about having a Patreon for this show. Is it's like the Facebook group is like one level of interaction and connection, but it's like people that join the Patreon are like ride or die. They're looking to take this relationship to the next level. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So it is.
Yeah.
So is that available now? Like, can they please let them know if they can go support?
So it's coming out tomorrow, actually.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah. It's Brendan Sagalow, Mike Feeney, Mike Cannon, myself. We're doing a podcast called What's the Scenario, where it's basically a hypothetical type podcast where we bring out, would you rathers, what ifs, certain questions, and we're going to take questions from audience members. And we basically start with the question. And of course, it takes tangential turns into God knows where. We tell stories, we trash each other. Mm-hmm. We're very much involved with our audience, and whoever has specific comments, we will interact and address those. So it's a little bit all over the place, but it's fun as hell, and I think people will really like it.
I love it. Creating like a new podcast. It's almost like your own TV channel. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Well, dude, Mike, thank you so much for doing this. I think we share the same mindset in terms of, and it took me years to get this mindset that I think comics have to hammer home, is like, just focus on what you can control and just start doing your own thing, start creating. And you're a prime example of that. And that's why I was so excited to get you on here, is because comics coming up and developing we are in our own heads, and there is a lot of self-doubt, and there is a lot of scarcity mentality and like me against them. But it really is just kind of, don't worry if that club doesn't book you. Don't worry if you don't get booked on that 3 a.m. bar show that 12 people show up to. It's like, that's out of your, don't worry you didn't get on the TV show. It's like, what can you control? What are you in control of? And what do you want? And just work towards that.
Yeah, man. Show business is not fair, especially on a corporate level. So anything that you can do as an artist, if you think that if you got into this for the love of the game, if you got into this because you love comedy, you love writing, and you love performing, then do that. Try to monetize it. Figure it out. And also have confidence in your product, because I'm one of those guys where it took a long time for me to, not think that, for me to not think that the networks were right. They say, oh, we love you, but we're not using you. So what the hell does that mean? If I spent time focusing on that, I could drive myself insane. But instead, I'm just like, well, I think what I'm doing is funny. I'm hearing the reaction from people in real time, and I'm also getting a heavy flow of things that are coming in online of people that also identify with this. So what the hell? Let's do it.
Yeah, you kind of opened up with that. It's like funny isn't people. They aren't looking for funny anymore. Like, it's
Yeah,
not.
I mean that's a fun. That's like fifth on the list. You know, and it's like I'm not trying to trash anybody mainstream because people are doing what they're doing and they're making some money and good for them. I would never take that away from anybody, but there is a system in place that is not necessarily rewarding people that are spending real time and effort mastering stand-up comedy.
What have you seen from what has been the result of the special? Are your podcast numbers up? Are like engagement up? Like are numbers up from it?
I think everything's up. Like I said, I mean, I just started hitting the road basically right after the special dropped and all those podcasts dropped, and I sold out my first club. That first weekend, I had a ton of people come out to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, which is insane.
That's great.
So it's like, people that watch it are interested in support. People that free thing, it doesn't, I don't know, from what I've seen, it does not go over people's heads that you put out a quality product for free when you could have charged. So everybody was like, hey man, I want to support now. I have a limited t-shirt out right now, right? So people that watched my special and didn't have to financially support it are now like, hey, I'll give you $20 for that t-shirt. You gave me an hour of laughs and I get a shirt out of it. Yeah, I'll spend that money. So it's all trying to garner favor and garner support from people that like what you do and also think you're going about it the right way.
Awesome. Well, Mike Cannon, dude, thank you so much for
Thank
being
you,
on
buddy.
Hot
I hope
Breath.
I was coherent. I don't even know.
No, this is great. I love interviewing comedians because at some point they're either like, oh, I talk too much, or none of that even made sense, or this is stupid. We always have to I said something profound, but I'm an idiot. I shouldn't. That wasn't me.
Yeah.
That was,
To be perfectly honest, guys, if you're listening and you thought I was an idiot, you're right.
It is.
I'm not debating with you. It's totally fine.
There it is. But dude, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, man. I wish you nothing but the best. And
Same to you.
Anybody else, maybe we'll get Homeless Pimp on here, but anybody else we can think of to get on here, dude. We're just trying to do this for comics by comics, you know?
Hell yeah, man. Good luck to you as well, and I hope you stay safe and healthy during this whole thing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike.
All right, brother.
And thank you to everyone that asked questions as well. We'll be back on Thursday with Jacob Williams doing another Hot Breath Live here in the group. So we will see you then.